I have connections here. My grandmother, my mum camped along up in Nimweta. I've got some family in Dorogo and a lot of family in Armel too. My twin brother lives just outside of Armel in RIVAS, so he's close to the country that I'd like to be. I'm a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, School of Education and Social Work at the University of Sydney, and I also lecture in the School of Education at Western Sydney University in the Masters of Teaching Secondary program.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I am a Wonga woman from Kalgoorlie, Goldfields region in Western Australia. I'm currently living on indoor water by country up in Townsville, and I am grateful to be here before you, speaking about some of these big concepts that is rolled up in some of the AIME and the worlds that I've been weaving into. So I would like to take a minute to acknowledge my ancestors and yours too, and the connection that they've had across time with non-human kin to maintain the line of life. And a lot of these concepts that I'm talking about today are quite new to me. I've been with AIME for the last 7 years. I'm the Vice Chancellor of Imagi-Nation University. And yeah, like I said, really grateful to be able to share and cross-pollinate some of this knowledge with you all today. I would like to also take a moment to invite our friends to help us call Imagi-Nation into the room today before we jump into some of the micro. Imagi-Nation. 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 I wonder about in this space, wondering about this place, and where might I find imagination? Are you in our soul? Right now? Right now? Right now? Maybe you live inside a light that travels all the way back through deep time, back to the very beginning.
That's really strong.
Oh, you're that light. The one that goes back to everything I am. Everything I ever will be. You ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom! You're like a lighthouse blasting coloured kaleidoscope visions of of creation, out to the mountains on the horizon. I often wonder about imagination.
Beautiful. That was beautiful. Really strong.
Alright, thank you, Professor Zana, for sharing that beautiful story with us and just inviting the imagination in the room. Hope your mind's got to wonder. Alrighty, so as the teacher means I'm playing up on the board, so I follow to the T, so you can also look at the play on the board. So I'm going to start with the first part of the presentation, which talks a bit about just an overview and a snapshot of what I've been doing so far with my PhD, and then Steph will take over, and then give you the broader AIME research stories. Alrighty, so again, as I said, I'm proud Aboriginal woman on my mum's side. Up there's a picture of my graduation, when I graduated from my master's of teaching secondary. On the right hand side is my mum. And that's when I make sure our cool images come back to this country. So on my grandmother's side, Kumbangi, in Dungari, and on my grandfather's side, Kimilori. On my dad's side, I am a Moroccan woman from Casablanca, with roots back to Casablanca. So I draw both sides of my ancestry and come from what Eileen Robinson describes as Indigenous standpoint. And I'll be sure to go back and criticise some of that after Tyson's yarns this morning. But look at, she built on some of the work from the Carter's work of Indigenous standpoint theory. So just acknowledging there that I lie in the middle of two knowledge systems, and just having a closer look at Naka's cultural interface. So sort of this research of myself sits in the middle. So it's just acknowledging that, and this sort of shows the value in the bi-epistemic or the Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledge systems, the higher knowledge. I will acknowledge it is it's an interesting place to be. It's exciting, it's messy, right smack bang in the middle of the interface. I know a lot of us in this room are dealing or doing stuff in the middle of this interface. So it's an interesting place to be. So I'm just going to start with the macro, how I got to this, and go into the micro of the research. So this is a little bit of a map of my own educational teaching philosophy and what's important to me in my teaching. So you can see the big bubbles around there are things that I think are important in my educational philosophy. So collaborative reflective learning, culture responsive teaching, holistic health and well-being, experiential hands-on learning, respect for diversity, our human and non-human kin, and place-based education. So at the centre there is holistic education, and I've got the 4 bubbles coming out of there. It should be physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, not just the intellectual there. And I guess the focus or the angle of our research comes into this is, if you take a step back again, it's culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy, but I'm focusing on the spiritual. And focusing on the spiritual by looking and investigating what the Imagi-Nation pedagogies and practices used by AIME in educational spaces are. Alright, so this is the broader research project that I'm the puzzle piece or a part of. So the broader research project is an ARC linkage project. ARC stands for Australian Research Council. So it's funded by the ARC between partner universities. You can see the partner universities down there. And with sort of non-academic space, so organisation, and our partner organisation is AIME. I'm at UCID, which is the admin organisation. My supervisors are Professor Kathy Burgess and Professor Valerie Harwood, and then we have other researchers at the other universities there. So at UQ we have Professor Bronwyn Fredericks. At UTS, actually she just moved to UNSW. We've got Professor Katrina Thorpe, and then we've got Professor Anthony Knight at UOW. So they're part of the broader project, and then my sort of research sits underneath as a puzzle piece in this bigger project. Alrighty, so my research questions are up here. So the main sort of broader question is, how can AIME's use of imagination help us to understand imagination's function and role in school education? And then I've got 3 sub-questions at the moment. The first one investigates what are the IPP or imagination pedagogies and practices used in imagination's TV episodes, which is 99 episodes that were released during COVID, and Steph will talk to that a bit later. And then as we get Mentorclass up and running, having a look at what goes into the Mentorclass or the IPP Mentorclass. My second research sub-question there is, how do these imagination pedagogies and practices function in AIME's project, and what is the impact there that they have on students and teachers? And my last research question is, how can AIME's imagination pedagogies and practices be adapted for students, mentors and teachers to support the educational access of not only our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but for marginalised students? Alrighty, so just for the macro sort of national picture of what's said about imagination in general. So you've got the Australian education priorities here. Goal 2 of the Alice Springs Declaration from 2020 states that the Australian government is committed to supporting young Australians to become, I quote, confident and creative individuals who have the imagination to maintain and establish healthy lives. And then the next sort of 2 blocks talk to 2 points in the rationale of the curriculum for 2 KLAs or key learning areas in secondary schools. So the first one here is in the curriculum of arts, and it's just mentioned in the rationale statement. It says, has a capacity to engage, inspire and enrich the lives of students, encouraging them to reach their creative and intellectual potential by igniting informed, imaginative and innovative thinking. And then the second reference is also in another rationale in the curriculum, and that's for the humanities and social sciences. And again in the rationale it states that the learning plays a key role in harnessing students' curiosity and imagination about the world they live in and empowers them to actively shape their lives. Alright, so you can see there, it's in the curriculum, just mentioned briefly in the arts and humanities and social sciences curriculum rationale. Whether it's implemented or not is another story, but again, it's sometimes categorized to arts and social sciences, but it can go across different categories. Alrighty, so during the process of my study, I had to do a literature review, as you do. The process that I started was looking at some of the, just the Western canon general literature. So if you're not familiar with imagination, or if you are, sorry, you would definitely know Steiner schools. So they're based on the Steiner-Waldorf philosophy, and that's rooted in holistic, interdisciplinary approaches to learning, with key imagination practices incorporated into schooling practices. So they use sort of the philosophies based on the head, so the intellect, the heart, which is the emotion, and the hands, which is the practical skills. More locally, you have Nielsen, who did his PhD out of University of Canberra, and he looked at imagination in Steiner schools, but then he also came up with the 7 methods of imaginative teaching, and they include drama, exploration, storytelling, routine, arts, discussion, and empathy. Although Vygotsky and Dewey don't actually explicitly focus on imagination, their ideas also help us understand the role of imagination in education. So they highlight the important symbols, cultural artifacts, experiential learning, creativity that enhance student imagination, thinking, and capacity. Then you've got Maxine Green's work, who focuses on imagination pedagogy for critical consciousness. We've got Egan, who focuses on imagination in the different KLAs or key learning areas or subjects of high school. And then you've got Judson, who also focuses on pedagogy in imagination education. I then went to see what is happening in the Indigenous literature space. So although the first 2 authors aren't Indigenous themselves, you've got 2 authors calling or sort of calling in for this to be something to be investigated. So there's a clear dearth in the literature here that needs to be explored, or in the general sort of, that could be happening but not being described. You've got Townsend and Cross, 2008. They argue that discourse on transformative pedagogy and Indigenous education in Australia is largely unexplored, and if explored, would have great benefit for all learners with a teaching method based on Indigenous values and philosophies. You also have Janine Genovese, who in her book that calls for radical amalgamation education for a more socially and equitable society. So she again makes that big claim with calling the book Brave Communities, I think it's called. And then you have some Indigenous academics, again, not from here but from across the sea. So you have Joanne Archibald. She outlines the 7 principles of educating the heart, mind, body and spirit through story work, respect, responsibility, reciprocity, reverence, holism, interrelatedness and synergy. And you've got Gregory Kahiti. He outlines the need for a bi-epistemic approach to pedagogies of imagination and calls for the need of a pedagogy that revitalises Indigenous people of the 21st century to reclaim Indigenous ways of being, doing and knowing from a context of spirit, land and community. And then that brings us to AIME's work. So the head of AIME, Jackman Bancroft, he talks a bit about this in his latest book, Woody Economics, and he discusses flow design and sustainable Indigenous knowledge education, and discusses imagination, which is the newly created online world, which Steph will talk to a bit later as well. So we can see here, and Whitney states it too, there's fragments of literature, there's no comprehensive story to centre Indigenous voices and imagination pedagogies in practice. So that's sort of, if we want to occupy a gap in research, that's the sort of gap. Alright, community engagement and the purpose. So all research needs to be beneficial to community. It needs to centre Aboriginal voice, we know this. All research must be centred on community recovery. So those are the 2 sort of drivers and purposes. If your research doesn't do that, scrap it, right? It needs to be beneficial for community. So I'm using Professor Lynette Riley's community engagement model. Maybe it's not too clear here, but you've got the Aboriginal community engagement process on one side, and you've got the Western research process. So the Western research process focuses on credentials, and then of course you put in your ethics application, and you've got the different steps there. But the Aboriginal community engagement process looks a bit different. And that acknowledges that before you even start the research, you have those yarns out in the community, you're having you're in your 1s and your 2 connections, and you're having those conversations, relationships before you even start. And this takes time. Acknowledging also that you have many social yarns before you have the research yarns. Like I've started with my Masters of Philosophy and upgraded with the PhD, and this has taken time, and I don't even think I've started with the research yarns. It's still going through the social yarns and developing those relationships, which take time. So it's fighting against the institutional deadlines and working with community and how long it takes community and the organisation, other things and dates to work in place. So I'm using that community engagement model there. I'm trying to. It's also having conversations with the local community, the ACG. It's not just the formal ethics application, but community ethics and protocols that we know we have that obligation and responsibility to follow. So this is a quick snapshot of the research design. Before I started the research, I was looking at just trying to get a real feel of what AIME's doing, and they do move a mile a minute, so it was a bit hard when I was grounding my feet and trying to see what they're doing. But Steph will talk to their story soon. But I was exploring a lot of the tools that they've already put out that you can engage with in your schools and education places through the Imagi-Nation suite, and there's a whole heap of resources online and available. So phase 2, during I was exploring the implementation of, I will be exploring the implementation of Imagi-Nation pedagogy and practices by teachers and mentors during the delivery of their programs, so Imagi-Nation TV and Mentorclass. And then after, it's just the follow-up and the feedback loops. So having to start to look at some of that data or that story, we've started to look at the Imagi-Nation TV episodes before we get up and running up in the mentor classes in schools. And these are some of the quotes that sort of capture what is imagination in this context. It's a very broad definition, but this is what some people are starting to say through the Imagi-Nation TV, which was students and guest speakers during COVID, so it was online. So imagination can be anything. For me personally, it belongs with everyone, and everyone has their own opinion about it. It can be from being really well to being really old, and everyone kind of has their own aspects about it. Mine is to have equal opportunities for everyone and to make everyone one, because our generation is the one that is going to try and make everyone succeed and change things in life. This is coming from a student. I'll give you a minute if you can see those 2-second bubbles. You can have a read of what some people have said about imagination. This is mainly students. Alrighty, so we're having a look at some of those Imagination TV episodes. We're transcribing them and we're using them to capture the emerging themes that are coming through those conversations that have happened in those episodes. I'm sort of speculating that some of that will inform how AIME is using pedagogy, how they use the imagination when they get out into the mental classes in schools. Alrighty, and lastly, the research contribution. So I've got this map on the side, it's got AIME at the centre, and you'll see the triangle there has tools, systems, and relations. And I kind of feel like my little project in amongst the bigger projects I'm working with Steph and the team is just describing the practices so that my little 80,000 to 100,000 thesis will then be a tool for community use, education spaces, organisations, to sort of capture what's done as a sort of case study. And it will sit among different tools that AIME has out. And that brings me to the end of my part. I will hand over to Steph in a moment, and she'll share some of the story about Beck and what they're doing. And I just want to say that I'm happy that we have us two in this, because sometimes working with uni institution deadlines can be difficult, and I kind of feel like it makes it easier when I have someone to text and bounce off, and she's been a great source of learning for me in this process.
Thank you, Zana. I thought it would be most helpful for me to jump in and introduce AIME's worlds, or reintroduce depending on how familiar you are with the work, and then show a few maps of where the tools and the development and some of the interesting areas of application and knowledge sharing flows that are happening. So AIME mentoring, birthed in 2005 here in Australia. Mentoring program was most known for the little bridge of mentoring from high schools to universities, and like some rough numbers around that after 20 plus years was 25,000 students mentored and 15,000 mentors, volunteers, activated. So it was a big volunteering movement as well with university students. National reach and expansion across that time. And the thing that I think AIME's always wanted is equity globally as well. But we can't get that in isolation. So some of the growth had shown that the transition or the evolution of AIME needed to be connected with more diversity to bring these networks together. So there was a golden ticket campaign launched in 2016 to take the model global and invite others to share it on different continents. But it's also about opening up those relationships as well. That's essentially what I see it as now, to bring knowledge in, to share and build together. So that's what it was most known for. So in COVID, no physical engagements. So Imagination TV was birthed to continue connecting and mentoring and building on online in whatever ways we could. Through there was like some patterns that were recognised in the way that we do connect. The algorithm of unlikely connections, or UNC times 5 as we call it, started to become more prevalent because we're working with people from, again, diverse groups to bring them together to creating that relational space and share knowledge in there. From that year or so that's the element that Zana is looking at now in the research, and those groups and how they work to spark imagination. From there, the university was born, Imagi-Nation University, and to help develop some more structured pathways of accreditation, how we started model outwards from the little node that started as. So that was in 2022, in 2020, that was born. And from there, after a year or so, through application, that took the expansion of AIME from just the golden tickets in, I think it was like Australia, and then another 5 countries, and not all of them lasted, but the continent of Africa has got a couple of strong embassy points, I guess, that are still going without our team over there. And after a couple of years of application with the uni, Imagi-Nation, which is our digital online nation, but also in the world as well, because that's where we connect to. That was born from that. So Imagi-Nation TV and Imagi-Nation Uni now exist within the nation, as well as a few other things that will help us define like the design, essentially, of nation states. So that's probably like our biggest, there's lots of ways of looking at it, but one of the core focuses is how to centre Indigenous knowledges within systems design. And Tyson speaks to this in Sand Talk with the hand, like all Western knowledge, and at the moment Indigenous knowledge is kind of sit behind. Like you get a bit of the dance and a bit of the art, but there's so much that's taken out of it when you're sitting behind Western knowledge. So what is the process of putting it in front and having that inform the way that our systems are designed? And a lot of that starts with being able to become in relation as well. So yeah, there's heaps and heaps of stuff kind of floating out from all of it. But I'll give you a little look at 3 pathways that help kind of streamline, because there's a lot of invites in there as well, some cross-collaboration research, engagements in community, sharing tools. But some of our 4 goals are by 2033, so we also have a death date that's counting down. We set it for 10 years. A couple of years ago, we're down to 7 recently. That's part of our time as well for regeneration. In the Imagi-Nation platform, the pathway in is getting a visa, so like you would for any other country, because that's an economic exchange and there's value that's taken by nation states for allowing people movement. So we have a process to bring people in, all the while we're looking at the health of the network as well, so the health of how the knowledge is generated and shared. A lot of the design in Imagi-Nation actually, one of the elements that I'll let you know as well is that the governance system, we have some custodians, 150, and the philosophy and theory behind it is weaving in with a bit of a mash-up of Metcalfe's law, the Dunbar numbers, and some kinship protocols as well, on how we connect people with limits and boundaries, and those theme circles as well. And Tyson and the labs, Powder Deacon is an example of one of our custodians that help govern us, and then we've got a map that kind of branches out globally with other people that are doing like research in Imagi-Nation, maybe over in the UK. So finding the people that are, I guess, the super nodes that are doing the work, so that the network's connected and distributed for the focused design that we're looking at. So 5,000 action visas by the end of 2033, which hopefully will help us develop some different accreditation pathways and different value, and a lot of this shifts value as well. We've got 130 Earthshot projects that we are calling them, and they are like a systems change residency where we'll invite people who are doing this work, say like looking at alternative forms of energy, what are we doing with the plastics in the ocean, how do we feed people, the housing, like everything that kind of builds society. There's a huge community of people doing that, so bringing them in to get some cross-connected, diverse, intersected knowledge, which also includes people like Uncle Noel Butler, who is from the Milton region, like working on the land, those different ways of intercepting the knowledge in the systems. 150 tools, I'll give you a couple of examples of those. There's the whole process of designing them, developing and distributing, like a little design arc, to allow them to be codified and to build the relations that we are seeking. And then there's like a process of embassy that we are always working in, that exist in different forms, but there's like a couple of focused areas that we do called Big Story. And then there's embassy moments where Tyson and I can sit and spend some time together at the beach and talk about design concepts as well, and share story. So that's the 3 arcs. And the uni arcs kind of placed in there. It helps facilitate like the research and development and publishing and all the things that we need to keep sharing, but also operating on the model of how nation states use universities as well to do the interconnected stuff that we need. The Imagi-Nation platform started as an idea 2022, I think. Jack kind of certainly announced it to a few partners as a sketch, and it's been built into this online world, so heaps and heaps of design in there. There's lots of ways for people to interact, but also it's not an attention where we're using the internet as a way to give examples of how that space can be used rather than a super extractive attention economy that you just cannot get away from, no matter how hard you try. But we are developing, like there's a whole lot of feedback loops that are coming through here, and that allows us to focus on the algorithm as well of the UNC ×5, connecting people, and building some of the tools in here as well. This is an example of a group that we will put together. So Joy Corps are our play on B Corps for organisations, and specifically looking at what does it take to get joy on the balance sheet. And there's a list of maybe 60 little micro credentials that they'll go through, and to build the accreditation. So all of this is incubating the accreditation pathways at the moment. Imagi-Nation president to return their young people from 18 to 15, I think, to 35, working on how to return us to custodial economics. A systems change citizen, so similar to the residency, but maybe not like a super node global connector, someone who's in, I don't want to say smaller because that's not right, but a different size network of influence. And then Uncle Noel as an example of an Indigenous systems knowledge lab, and being able to incubate those. So when there are strategies or calls for how to like embed Indigenous knowledges, like there are things that we can build out for identifying and verifying those different processes that are directly kind of linked to what we're calling the collab, so with the K, and how the knowledge from one place can be embedded into the system and meeting in that space in the middle. And some of that, a lot of that's like building through tools as well, protocols of how to be in relation and have some gifts and songs, and all of those elements hold different responsibilities. So allowing that space there, and then in schools as well, so having them accredited or build the accreditation pathways for how to become Imagi-Nation labs, and activating the community, like very much like what you're doing at the Freedom School, bring the community in doing the cross-collaboration connection in there as well. So we've got we opened officially this year, so the tech was like a big thing in building, but we've got this cohort in this year where we're testing the application of all the theory now. So that was in March, and yeah, we've got 6 months left to go. So this is the example of a USB times 5, and the thinking behind that as well is that it can be a force multiplier for solving complex problems, because it allows us to access intelligence from the margins, which so often you don't get. There's no movement there. Like you're told, go here, do this, do that. Like we compare it to these frames that are coded with like transactions. So I'm trying to make space, I think, for that, which is hard to make space as well. Some of our embassy work. I could have spent a long time on this, but we'll do Imagi-Nation in schools. So there's some activations down there that you can see. I was invited to go to Canada with Dr. John Davis and Josh Waters to do some embassy with the Algoma lab with Melanie Goodchild and crew over there. So that's like another example. But I really saw embassy in action. Actually, like there's a gifting blanket there with the different artifacts and like lots of processes and protocols that helped. Thank you. Bring it out of the like abstract for me as well. So lots of in-place learning. And then big story is like a more focused activation that will have the truth go to. And down the bottom here you can see there's like a few people, that's a fashion show happening in Kampala on a landfill of waste, and the project there is about reclaiming and in the fashion industry and looking at all the waste that's there, which is a project that one of our crew is working on with the community. And a couple of days after the event, there was like a landslide of it that had actually taken the lives of people, so it was enormous. And these things that are being taken too big to hide anymore. So activating spaces for people to come together to be able to design out of it. So that's a little bit of the embassy work. We have some tools, books that are being created with our crew that will help share process. A lot of it is about being able to share process. And up here that are nearly ready, we've got some production that's been happening. Fight for Hope, which is the professors, our friends, the puppets are sharing that story. It'll be a series that we release across the next 7 years, as one tool. And then Imagine Film, which will be ready in August 1st, that we're hoping to share with communities and schools and organisations, different activations, festivals even, just depends. But the idea around the tools is that they'll be free, accessible, and unlock universal imagination, mentoring and custodianship. Also there's 150 of those that will come out. And then there's a design inquiry. There's a process of designing inquiry with the uni. I know I don't have much time left, but there's a lot in here. And we're populating that over into how to design with natural systems so that nature can actually take a seat at the table in design and have a role in like governance, whatever that looks like. There's about 50 different projects that we're looking at incubating at the moment with the uni, and different phases of activation as well as we connect people in. One example is we're working on cultural indicator species and how that can look for identifying the health of ecosystems. And designing of biocultural marketplaces. So yeah, lots of space in the invites. And I thought I'd leave you with some maps. So I am an artist as well, and I do a lot of my translations visually. And there's just a little day in the life of what it looks like in the uni with different nodes. So Uni of SA, applying the tools, UC doing some research in different kind of branches, a little bit of consulting that's quite new with Department of Fair Trade here in Australia, like Indo-Pacific stuff. Crowddoing, which is an organisation that's attached to Yes, the Buckminster for Institute connected with design and then the Australian Centre of Social Innovation here in Australia, working on national futures, looking to publish a paper and help us develop a pedagogy around the uni process of design and how to get people to embed deaf, art, in problem collaboration on lasting connections, non-human knowledge, returning sport and tools as some concentric circles of design that we work through. Yeah, and we kind of roll that across. This photo was taken down at Winnell's property, actually down in Milton, where the fire had gone all the way through, and he was bringing some life back to some of the places. And when I saw the team rolling this across, I was like, oh, well, if we try to get all these processes across ecosystems, is that like bringing life back to them? So, yeah. And then I have some story to share. I don't know if you have any more time. This is a nice little cliffhanger.
Thanks for sharing. It's so much work. I mean, I'm sure we'll try and get to talk to you and it's really impressive. So much work.
So if you look on the schedule at, I think, 2:20 or somewhere around 2 o'clock, there is a speaker that is not going to be there. That time will be, we can hold that time for all the speakers to sit at the front table and you hold your questions and you can ask each one of the speakers questions. So it'll be like a roundtable question panel kind of thing. So that's, yeah, I think that's at 2:20 or something like that. So that space is there to pick up on questions and more detailed discussion. So right now we are 15 minutes into, or was it? Yeah, into lunch, so let's have lunch.